What does science say when it comes to the shape of our planet? Well, science says that it's a sphere. Clearly, as we all know, flat earthers refute that. They deny it. They believe it is flat. But what about the Bible? And if you're a Christian watching, what should you believe? Science or the Bible? Does the Bible point to a flat earth? No. Intro. Hello number ones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking, and today we'd like to approach this specific topic, which is of course argumentative discourse around the shape of the Earth, specifically from the point of view of not necessarily science, I've already mentioned that at the beginning, but faith, whether or not the Bible is indeed a flat earth book. It's been a while since I focused on this kind of argumentative discourse / conspiracy theory, but the reality is that I think it's pretty well known that I'm not a flat earther. I do not believe in flat earth. If you do, brother, more freedom to you. If you're gonna get mad at me because I believe in the sphere, I know what to tell you. With that being said, I've also made it very clear multiple times that I am a Christian, and one of the things that flat earthers use when it comes to backing up their positions on the shape of the Earth is indeed the Bible. So on this video today, we're not only going to discuss the obvious fact that science clearly points to the sphere, but we're also going to debunk this concept that the Bible instead points to this, meaning the flat earth. And in fact, this isn't just a matter of faith in terms of Christianity or Judaism. I will demonstrate that even if you go back to ancient Middle Eastern cosmology, you will not find the flat earth model either. One thing that you will notice recur during this analysis is the following point, which is foundational to our rebuttal. Flat earthers are trying to force a modern literalist cosmology debate onto ancient texts that were not written to settle that question. The Bible instead uses a mix of poetry, phenomenological language, temple imagery, royal imagery, common ancient cosmological idioms, literary and poetic devices, ancient Middle Eastern idiomatic language to provide doctrinal foundation. Thus, it's not apt nor excusable from a scientific standpoint, nor is it defensible, even from the perspective of biblical interpretation. The first topic that I would like to tackle very briefly is this idea of trying to look for the shape of the Earth from a scientific perspective through biblical exegesis. So I'm going to make this one clear right off the bat. The Bible does not support the flat earth model, nor does it support the sphere model. Now, this is important to underline. The Bible is not a science book, and therefore if you try to look for scientific evidence when it comes to concepts that do not pertain to the domain of what's being addressed in said book or collections of books, then you're approaching it the wrong way. Once again, the Bible is not a science book. It does not teach a flat earth. It does not teach a spherical earth. It does teach, however, that the earth was indeed created by God. That's what you will find in the Bible. Whether you believe in it or not, at this point, is irrelevant to the core of this discussion. And by reading the verses in Genesis, which is the one chapter that discusses the creation of said planet where we all live, you will notice that descriptive language is in fact not utilized to give us hints onto the shape of the world. Now you might ask, why is that? I'm going to answer this assuming that the people who are asking the question are of my faith or share my Christian faith. Of course, if you don't share my Christian faith, then you will notice some assumptions that are connected to faith that might not click with you. So I'll keep this one short in order to maintain the secular aspect of this video in order to be able to address as large of an audience as possible. But do excuse me for a second. To my Christian brothers and sisters, Scripture reveals truth by that which we are told. Nature reveals truth by that which we observe. Not everything needs to be pointed out to us through Scripture, but those things that we require Scripture to help us understand. Anything that we can figure out through our own minds and science and intelligence and study, we can do that through observation. All right, back to the topic. Generally speaking, flat earthers use a series of verses that they absolutely love in order to try and paint this flat earth model onto the ancient scriptures. We're going to address these verses one by one, but I do want to say one thing. When it comes to ancient cosmology, there is only one thing that they're getting right in the model, and it's the dome. With that being said, that's not even pertaining to the Bible. It's mostly pertaining to Sumerians, possibly Akkadians. We'll talk about it a little bit. But then there are a million other aspects aspects of the way ancient Middle Eastern populations believed cosmology to function that have absolutely nothing to do with the flat Earth, with the ice barrier, and all the other things that they attach to the model. But let's jump into the verses. Genesis 1:6, and we are using interlinear for those of you who want to follow along and read in Hebrew as well. But to begin, when reading the English translation, literal, it says, "And said God, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide between the waters and the waters." King James Version renders it this way. "And God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters." Very similar, which is one of the reasons why the King James Version is my favorite translation. But a translation still it is. So fixating on every single specific usage of words in order to try and paint whatever conclusion you have already come to into your head is a way to not defend against selective bias and at the same time ignore translation theory. In other words, if you're going to try and use the detailed description of specific words in order to interpret whatever the heck you decided you want the book to say, then a robust methodological approach that dives into the original language becomes necessary. In fact, paramount. Otherwise, if you just read it in English and you just interpret a word without knowing anything about the contextual analysis, what people thought in that period, we are in the late Bronze Age, early Iron Age, depending on how much was actually written and how much was coming from previous oral traditions, some of which could go back all the way to the Stone Age. Without that focusing on words and trying to use them in order to paint this weird picture from the perspective of modern flat earth theory is unprofessional and ridiculous. When it comes to this verse, it's quite clear that the waters below represent the oceans, the seas, and possibly subterranean sources of water. In other words, this is earthbound water. But what about the waters above? Because that is a little bit of a strange expression, or at least it is to us. Scholars have been discussing this, but generally speaking, these are interpreted as meaning either atmospheric clouds and rain, or some kind of primordial water vapor, canopy, if you will, that can represent the hydrological cycle. This is, by the way, also found in Near Eastern symbolic views of cosmology. It's not unique to the Bible nor Bronze Age Jews. However, do keep in mind that some terminology is used symbolically or as a poetic device in specific population clusters and cultural realities. But before we do that, massive announcement. Check this out. You're gonna love it. As many of you know, or at least I think you know, I've been writing a book, my new journey into becoming an author. I've mentioned this on a few videos and on X, but this book was indeed crowdfunded. Now, any person who has donated or will donate to the crowdfunding will receive a full audiobook, and this is crowdfunding exclusive. So, as a way to say thank you to the people that have donated and supported my dream of becoming an author, if you have a minimum of $5 donation, you will receive the entirety of the audio file of the book, recorded by me with my voice, no AI involved, as a crowdfunding exclusive reward. This applies retroactively, so for all 262 donors that I've had so far, you'll get this, and anyone who decides to donate $5 or more, thank you very much, never expected, always appreciated, then you will be guaranteed a audio file of the book by the end of the crowdfunding campaign. Important, once the crowdfunding campaign is over, this audiobook version will not be made for sale. So this is once again crowdfunding exclusive. It's a perk. If you're interested in the audiobook, click the link in the description, and thank you so much. The word that we find in Genesis when discussing the firmament does come from an ancient root meaning to spread out or to be beaten out. When something spreads, it doesn't necessarily give us the idea of solidity, although universe is spreading as well as we understand. But if we wanted to focus on this possible interpretation, the one of something being beaten out, it does perhaps convey this idea of solidity, which some flat earthers might try to use as a way to justify then the solid dome, at least for those who believe in the dome. Moreover, there are several verses that tell us about how God will stretch out heavens like a curtain or a tent. These are clearly rich poetic devices. They're not meant to be taken literally. They are meant to help you visualize something that is far beyond our ability to comprehend, God's ability to create. So, to try and ascribe the waters above as some representation of the dome, which I've heard people say, it's nonsensical. In fact, even if this was described with a term that could convey the idea of solidity, it still wouldn't matter, because what do we say today? When we say the firmament, yeah, it does include the word firm. I don't think there is anyone among us who for a second thinks that as we go through the atmosphere, you're gonna hit something and the rocket is gonna fall. Not to mention, if you connect it to a later verse, such as the one found in Genesis 7:11, then you'll notice that as the floods are described occurring, we are told that the fountains of the great deep, waters below, and the windows of heaven, waters above, were opened. Which strengthens the idea that with waters above, what the ancients were really talking about was precipitation phenomena. The next point is going to be the expression the four corners of the earth, which can be found on verses such as Isaiah 11:12, Ezekiel 7:2, and Revelation 7:1. Often, flat earthers utilize this expression, ignoring completely the idiomatic nature of it, which is well known among linguists and experts of these type of languages, and say, well, if you've got four corners on the earth, then it cannot be a sphere, because a sphere does not have corners, which personally I find a ridiculous way to utilize the book to imply that then it's definitely talking about a flat earth, because if a sphere doesn't have four corners, neither does a circle that is flat. No corners. So at this point the earth is a square, if we're gonna go that way, but that's not what that verse means. It is well understood that this specific idiom means the entirety of the earth, the whole world. Not to mention several Bible reference material denotes the importance of number 4 due to its connection to cardinal directions. In other words, north, south, east, west is what that means. These are the four corners of the earth, not some kind of imaginary geometrical shape that the ancients were trying to push onto us in order to connect it to your flat earth model. In Isaiah 40:22, we are told about the circle of the earth. The Hebrew word in question has multiple possible translations. It can indeed translate to circle, or vault, or the horizon. Thereby, whichever version of the Bible you are going to read is going to have to make a decision when it comes to translation. This is very basic when it comes to translation theory, but of course a lot of flat earthers ignore that. So first we would have to determine whether or not they actually meant to say circle, or perhaps they meant the horizon. And of course if it's the latter, the whole shape situation goes immediately into the trash. But even if I wanted to play by the rules of those who are pushing this idea, and I wanted to decide and try to steelman the argument, and let's pretend for a moment that they actually did mean circle. Well, I think it would make a lot more sense from an ancient people to mean an encircled environment, meaning boundaries. In other words, the verse, the passage, is talking about God's transcendence, his power over the entirety of the inhabited world. It's not a lesson on geometry. This is the philologically safe interpretation. Oftentimes, flat earthers also use other verses such as Psalm 93:1, which is already insane because Psalms, in the very few instances where it may appear to us that maybe whatever we are told could be interpreted as meaning a disk, regardless. And another thing that we need to keep in mind is that oftentimes the Bible's language about the earth is observational, meaning from the point of view of how it appears to humans. The concept about poetic language and idiomatic expressions is also found in expressions such as the ends of the earth, and this one in fact connects to us very easily, differently from others that might sound a little more obscure and might require a certain level of understanding of that type of language in that specific historical context. But this one, if we say the ends of the earth, and we can still say it today, if you're writing, whether it be a novel, piece of literature, or a poem, and you use this expression, which is very likely, which is not a strange or bizarre thing to do, even in a modern time, it doesn't mean that now all of a sudden you'll think that the earth has an end, meaning that you are now a supporter of flat earth theory. And so if this can be applied to us today, idiomatic expressions, then even more so should it be applied to people from thousands of years ago in completely different sections of this planet. Another point of attack is cherry picking, selective choice of verses. They do choose to be extremely literal when it comes to the circle of the earth or the four corners of the earth, yet I imagine they're not going to be literal with expressions such as death opening its mouth or the stars singing. What this tells us is that whenever someone tries to utilize the Bible as some kind of flat earth book, they are not deriving meaning from text. What they are doing is that they are importing meaning from bias. So, to wrap it up neatly, how many verses tell us that the earth is flat? 0. None. Nothing. Not even one. Not even one. Now, obviously, everyone is free to believe in whatever you want, and it's not like we Christians don't disagree on several matters. I mean, I hope we don't disagree on whether or not Jesus was resurrected. I'd say that one is out of the question. Definitely, there is the young earth versus old earth versus theistic evolution positions within Christianity. And at the end of the day, if you're a Christian and you also decide to become a flat earther, then whatever, that's up to you. I can respect your freedom. We'll have to agree to disagree. And also, if you're a young earth creationist, we'll have to agree to disagree. But what I find unfortunate is that there are Christians that fall prey to this idea that the Bible somehow preaches flat earth, and therefore if you reject flat earth, you are rejecting the Bible. This is manipulation. It's manipulative, it's incorrect, but it uses people's faith, and people who are fellow Christians might end up thinking, oh, if I accept the science and reject the flat earth theory or the flat earth model, am I rejecting the Bible? So let me just tell you this, brother or sister. No, you're not. You can absolutely accept the science and reject the model simply because the model is clearly wrong. Already the ancient Greeks had figured that one out. All the leaders and kings and bishops and priests and popes knew in the Middle Ages as well that the earth was a sphere, but they didn't base that on scripture. They based that on the studies of the great minds that preceded them in ancient Greece. If we can read the ancient sources now, obviously the educated elite could read it too. So if a medieval Christian king who did not have the science and utilized logics and reason to figure out that the earth was indeed a sphere, how much more should we that are blessed with the science accept the sphere as Christians and utilize this knowledge? At the end of the day, I will soon make a dedicated video to defend the idea of science and faith and how they can go together. The reality is, the only point in which science would collide with faith is if it were to try to deny the existence of God or the resurrection of Jesus for those of us who are Christians. But everything else, if science presents good evidence, accept the evidence. At the end of the day, look at science as a tool to observe what God has created. But as I say, I'll make a dedicated video to that. In the King James Version, for instance, you'll notice that there are 28 times or instances where the expression ends of the earth, the one I just mentioned before, is used. And the Hebrew word for it is the one that should usually be translated as extremities. Fully understood by professional linguists that the way ancient Israelites used this word was a way to reference to the uttermost reaches of the inhabitable world. They definitely weren't talking about the ice barrier, just to mention one. As I was mentioning at the beginning, even if you look at ancient Sumerian cosmology, even then you won't find the flat earth model. Sumerians did believe the earth to be an expanse. They describe this as ki in their language. And then they describe what's above, an, in their language, as a solid dome. But they also describe what's underneath, which is called Kur, the dark realm beneath the earth. And that's what's gonna make the Sumerian ancient description of our world stand out and be different from the flat earth model. Because you see, the Sumerians didn't believe that the earth was some kind of flat disk with barriers and a dome in the middle of nothing or in the middle of space. In details, you'll notice that it's a layered approach. There are multiple and multiple layers of existence. Does this look like the flat earth model to you? Ki is where we live, Apsu, freshwater sea, the underworld, then you have heaven of the constellation, heaven of the younger gods, heaven of the elder gods. It's completely different once again. This is, for instance, Hindu cosmology, so once again, you'll notice lots and lots of layers. And just like any of these is so different from whatever the heck flat earthers believe in, then at the same time will be ancient biblical cosmology. It has nothing to do with what flat earthers believe today. I hope this helps. If you're a Christian, you can absolutely reject the flat earth model. Trust me, it's not in the Bible. Thank you for watching. If you're enjoying this video so far, please take a moment to check out my Patreon page. With as little as a $5 support, you can help us ensure that we can continue to produce high quality and high researched content. And at the same time, you get access to polls, extra videos, unlisted streams, and much more. Thank you so much.